I just wanted some clarification on tithing.
Being enabled to forgive somebody who causes an offense
Does
towards
it really matter whether someone is Protestant or Catholic?
The genealogies are different from Matthew to Luke.
I was wondering what the Bible said in terms of what I should do.
This is Pastor's Perspective. We're here every Monday through Friday providing answers on a variety of topics, including the Bible, end times, other religions, and the family. Call right now with your question at 1-888-564-6173. That's 888-564-6173. You can also post your question at facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. And now here again is your host, Brian Perez.
Thank you once again for joining us on the Pastor's Perspective program. We are here and ready to answer your questions about the Bible and the Christian faith. And in the studio today, Pastor Brian Broderson from Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. You hear him on the Back to Basics radio program. You may have also written or read some of the books he's written, like this one here. It's his updated book on spiritual warfare. It's called The Powers of Darkness and the People of God. And in the studio with us as well is Ray Bentley from Maranatha Chapel in San Diego. You hear him on the Maranatha radio program, and he's also written books. And here's his latest on the Mount. Nope, this isn't his latest anymore. He's got a new one. It's the follow-up to On the Mountain of the Lord. This is The Threshing Floor.
Yes.
Ray, good to have you here,
Hey,
man.
it's great
How
to
are
be
ya?
here. Very good. Thank you.
Awesome.
Good. My turn?
Your turn.
Okay. Was that was a pass off to me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, it's good to be here. It is great to be together. It's great to have Ray in the studio. And it's great to have Vicki in the studio.
Yes.
She's not going to say much unless she needs a help or correct Ray.
She communicates with her eyes, you know. She's looking at me and going,
But
no,
she is here.
don't go there.
Because there are people watching us, not just listening to us. So I wanted to actually let them know that Mrs. Bentley is here in the studio with us as well. And Mrs. Broderson was going to be here in the studio, but her priority is her new grandson and her daughter who's coming home from the hospital with her new grandson. So she's there to greet them and to help them get settled into new life with little Remy James Hughes, our sixth grandchild.
Congratulations,
Yes.
Brian. That is so cool.
We are so thrilled. You know?
Remy James.
Yeah, Remy James. And you know, you guys know because you have grandkids, and
Yeah.
you know how you're waiting, and then you're like, when is this baby going to come? And then, of course, the mother, Vicki, you know that the mother really is wondering when the baby's going to come. But we had, so the interesting thing is Kelsey, her due date was yesterday. So she had the baby on the due date, which is kind of rare, right?
That's good. Yeah.
It doesn't happen too often.
Good guess.
So the doctor had told her the day before, or 2 days before, okay, this is my last time I'm going to see you until after the baby's born, unless if we go a week late, then we're going to have to induce. And it was like, oh no, we don't want that. And then boom, next day, here we go. And Remy's here, yeah. So
That's a
we're all
blessing.
good.
And
yeah.
how big?
He was 7 pounds, 14 ounces, and 20 inches long.
Great.
Yeah.
On the 20th of...
On the 20th
yeah.
day of the
220.
second month of the
2020.
2020.
Wow.
I think that means something. I
Yeah,
have no
it
idea
does.
what.
I think when he gets older, it's going to be easy to write his birthday. 2-20-2020.
Perfect.
That's
At
great.
2 in the afternoon?
Yeah. No, it wasn't
Oh,
2.
okay.
It was
2 in the morning.
8:28 in the morning. Yeah.
There's another 2.
He's going to be a double blessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's great. We're super excited. And it's great to be together. So, Ray, we are here today. Maybe we'll take some calls the second half, but maybe not, because we're going to just have a good conversation. You and I haven't been here in the studio together for a while.
Yeah.
I think the last time we were together was maybe when the first book in this trilogy, right?
No. Well,
No.
now it's going to be a 5-book series.
Oh, 5 books.
5 books. This is number 2
Yeah.
of 5.
Is that a 5G? How do you?
Yeah, 5G. Yeah.
It's
5G.
the,
Hey.
it's the Pentateuch.
Ooh, there you go.
Ray's going for,
Stories.
he's competing with Moses. He's
Oh,
going
my
for
gosh,
the,
yeah.
The 5 books of Ray.
Well, 5 stories. It's going to be fun.
Okay, so this is the second
Yes.
then of 5 in the series. And does the series have a title?
It's called the Elijah Chronicles.
Okay, the Elijah Chronicles. And the first book was On the Mountain of the Lord.
On the Mountain of the Lord, yes.
And now this is the Threshing Floor.
And this is called the Threshing Floor. And the co-authors are Bodie Taney and her husband Brock Taney.
Right.
And of course, they're well known. I mean, they've sold millions of books. The Zion Chronicles and many others.
Zion Covenant, Zion Chronicles.
Yeah, so they've written some 70 novels. And then God brought us together and we thought, wow, she's a great storyteller, has a great history in the Jewish people and Israel and is Jewish herself in background. And Brock is a great historian. And so I've got prophecy, and so we thought they've never done anything about what's happening now. It's always been first century, the rebirth of Israel in 48, 1967. So it was like, hey, let's talk about, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. Yeah. Let's write a series and kind of wrap what's happening and unfolding from Bible prophecy right now in Israel. And there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. So her other books were sort of like what you would call, at least the Zion Chronicles and the Zion Covenant, they were like a historical
fiction. Yes.
So this is sort of a fiction, but with the prophetic.
Yes. So this
going back to the prophetic scriptures,
right,
and then projecting into.
Yeah, it's also historical. All the things that are going on and real people. But the characters are a story, and embedded into it then is prophecy and kind of what's happening, what's unfolding right now.
Okay.
So, it's been amazing. It's just been a great, fun ride.
Yeah. Where do you get the time to write? I mean, these are pretty good sized books.
Yes. What I'm doing is I preach it first.
Yeah.
And then I get my notes, and then I send all of my thoughts and ideas and kind of the prophetic outline, and I send Bodie my outlines, like for my sermons, and I go, I think let's talk about this. Can you work this into the story? She goes, that'd be great. I know exactly how to do it. And
that's good.
So then we go back and forth, and but it's been a blast. It's been exciting.
Okay, so for our listeners today, let's talk a little bit about the book. We don't want to talk too much about it because we don't want to give it away. No. But back us up and let's talk about the first book.
Sure.
And then you can lead into the
Okay, so the first book is called On the Mountain of the Lord. And so the focus of the series is basically we're living in the days of the coming of the Lord. The Mount Zion, the Temple Mount, is the most controversial site probably on the planet. This is where the temple once stood. This is where Jesus came. This is where he's coming back. So what's interesting to me is that a lot of people don't know that the temple was originally on a mountain. So was the Garden of Eden. So it's that's where human history started, was on the top of a mountain with Adam and Eve. Then we got kicked out of the garden, kind of cast down. And now the story of redemption from Genesis to Revelation is God bringing us literally to ascend, aliyah, to go up and bring us back into the garden. So the mountain of the Lord. Basically the character is a fairly, let's call him a millennial guy named Jack Garrison, who's not into, Israel, say, or the Jewish people or prophecy. He's a widower. He has tragically lost his wife, and kind of along with that, his faith and confidence in God and any kind of a plan. But he is brought into this group that is to bring advice and counsel for peace for the Middle East. So as he goes to Israel, all of a sudden, he doesn't really believe anything biblical, but he goes on this journey. He is met by this character named Eliyahu, starts having dreams and visions where this guy shows up in his dreams or appears to him named Eliyahu. Well, Eliyahu is the Hebrew name for Elijah. So the Bible talks about in the days, Elijah will come before the great day of the Lord. So we've kind of borrowed from the idea of a Christmas story. The ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. We're now going to prophecies past. Jack gets drawn into these real scenes prophetically, and then he gets drawn into what's happening right now, where he sees things and kind of sees through the spiritual realm. Wow, it's real. This is really happening. And then shortly he's going to be brought into what's about to happen, the headlines of tomorrow. So that's kind of the premise of the story. And I'll leave it with this. While he's over there, he gets assigned a secret police, Jewish, beautiful, attractive girl, Betty, who's assigned to watch over him and protect him. So there's kind of this Christian-Jewish relationship that is beginning to unfold, and that's part of the story behind everything, too.
Of course.
Of course.
Yes.
You know. So the most recent book just came out in November, just a few months ago. It's called The Threshing Floor.
Yeah.
So not only is the Temple Mount on top of a mountain, but originally the Temple Mount was a threshing floor.
Right.
That's where David went. He bought the threshing floor of Araunah. So, very simply, a threshing floor is a place where you separate the wheat from the chaff, the good from the bad, righteous from unrighteous. And I believe, Brian, we are living, and I'm sure you guys would agree, Brian, and obviously my wife, Vicki, that we're living in a kind of a threshing floor moment in the world. And the reason they put threshing floors on top of mountains is because that you need wind. And wind comes to the top of mountains. And then you throw everything up in the air, and the chaff goes one way, the wheat goes another way. And I believe that God is literally in our nation and around the world throwing nations and kingdoms up into the air, and then the wind of his Holy Spirit is blowing powerfully, and he's beginning to separate the wheat from the chaff, the sheep from the goats, the righteous from the unrighteous. So I call it, we're living in a threshing floor moment. And that's kind of the title of the book. And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
there you go.
Wow. So how can people get a copy of the book?
Well, it's, Amazon, they can obviously go on Amazon. And by the way, I read the first book of the audio copy of On the Mountain of the Lord, if they want to get that, kind of get the characters and setting of the story. But the second one, we had a professional guy actually read it. And while I do love to read and so forth, I got to admit that a professional guy reading sounds a lot better, So anyway, so you've got that, and then it's an ebook, it's an audiobook. They can order it from Amazon. Also, if they want, they can go to raybentley.com, and they can, they could actually buy both of the books together and in a bundle. Okay. And then I've got another book I wrote. This was back in 2014 called The Holy Land Key. And The Holy Land Key is not a novel. It's a kind of my prophetic journey over the last 20 years of going to Israel and all the relationships and all the people I've met, Jewish, Arab, political, mayors, Ron Nachman, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I've got a story in the book about that. And what I've learned about prophecy and what God is doing in the Messianic community, the believing Arab, Palestinian community. How do we navigate all that? What's the Bible say? So that's kind of if you want to really study prophecy, the Holy Land Key. But these are stories that are fun, and you're going to learn a lot, all based in real history and biblical accuracy, and bringing us up to speed.
Yeah. Yeah, this is just good reading, enjoyable reading. Yeah. It's like watching a good movie.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been waiting for this one to come out so I can find out what happened to Bet.
Yes. Okay, so I'll give you this one.
Oh,
This
okay,
one's yours.
cool. Wow, hey, cool.
Yeah, you get that.
I told you if you told him that, he'll give you the book. So.
Here, let me officially,
Bet.
for those who are watching, look, I'm giving a gift. Here you go.
Wow. Can I get you to sign this?
Brian Press. Yes.
Ooh, look, he's signing it.
All right.
Very nice.
Right here, you're witnessing it today.
I already signed it.
You already signed it?
All
Okay,
right.
never mind.
Uh-oh.
All right, it's already signed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good. RayBentley.com is where you can go to get your copy of The Threshing Floor or the first book called On the Mountain of the Lord, or any of Ray's books that he's written. When is the movie coming out?
Well, you know what? I'm going to say this because Bodhi has actually written some screenplays for some movies, some Christian testimonies and things. And she's, and we both believe this is such a great series. The Christian movies are coming up in their, production and their level of expertise. But there's great stories, great testimonies, but there really hasn't been a great Christian, what I would call action adventure. This is an action adventure story with a Christian theme, with Israel, prophecy, a lot of stuff, Christians and Jews coming together. And I think it would make a great series.
Yeah.
Kind of like The Chosen is now, out there, kind of a Netflix version, although I think it's on VidAngel. So I think it would make a great thing. So if anybody's listening, any producers, people that want to help sponsor that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're ready.
Right. So, Ray, you have become, I think, more and more recognized and kind of identified as a prophecy expert. And, that there were a number, back 25, 30 years ago, there were a number of guys that you would kind of think of in those terms, you know, and conferences would happen. And, all the way back to like the Hal Lindsey time. And then, of course, Chuck, Pastor Chuck Smith, Chuck was very well known as a prophecy expert. And in some ways, it's almost like the mantle of Chuck has come upon you for this because, and Chuck was a huge influence in your life, obviously.
Oh, gosh, huge.
And from the time you were young.
Yes, I was in high school.
Yeah.
And I remember...
Tell the story about...
I have kind of a different story than a lot of the Calvary guys. I was a church kid.
Yeah.
Started in the Nazarene church in junior high, then ended up in a Wesleyan church for a while down in San Diego, and then... But this is in the 70s, so, my high school years were 72 to 75, and there was a revival happening. And by the way, I believe that the Jesus People Revival, because in June of 1971, I think it was, the cover of Time magazine was a picture of Jesus, and it was called the Jesus Revolution.
Right.
And you know what really, they say, ignited the fire of that revival was the Six-Day War in 1967, where against all odds, and 5 nations came against Israel, and in 6 days, they not only won, but they captured the Golan Heights to the north, on the from Syria. They got the West Bank from Jordan. They got the Gaza Strip down south, and they got East Jerusalem. And inside of East Jerusalem, the Temple Mount was in the hands of the Jewish people for the first time in 2,000 years. And all of a sudden, man, that kind of blew up the world. Like, whoa. For 2,000 years, much of the church has been kind of a little bit replacement theology. Yeah, God used the Jews back in the past, but now the church has replaced them. But when Israel became a nation in 1940, it was like, maybe not so much. But then really in 1967, that lit a fire. There was like, oh my gosh, we could literally be living in the generation of the second coming. So I had heard about Chuck. He was talking about the Lord coming. He came down and spoke in a church down in San Diego. I went and listened to him. And I turned and said, this is where I want to go. I want to become a teacher of the Bible. And I think one of the reasons Chuck got into prophecy a lot is because he taught through the whole Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. And he was very pro, for what God is doing with the Jewish people, fulfilling prophecy. And as I like to say, I started emulating him, and I started in Genesis and went through Revelation and then started over again. And I like to tell people, when you teach through the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, there's a lot of Jews in the Bible. They're everywhere. I mean, it starts with a guy named Abraham in Genesis, and it ends with the 12 tribes and the 12 foundation stones and the 12 gates, etc., of the tribes of Israel and Jesus, the son of David, etc. So Israel is very much prominent in the Bible, that God is not done with them, God is using them, God is fulfilling prophecy before our eyes. So Chuck was probably one of the most powerful guys to talk about the relevance of the Bible to today.
Yeah, and remember back, you remember the film Future Survival that Chuck actually, produced, basically. Him and a guy named Dan Agulian, and I still remember the pictures of him in Israel, standing there with, a few of the generals, by the tanks, and they're getting the explanation for what happened, in the 67 war and then in the 73 war. And I think you guys know that Cheryl, my wife, she was in Jerusalem during the Yom Kippur War.
Wow.
And they had to...
I've never heard that.
Yeah. They had to be evacuated, and they were one of the only planes that were allowed to get out after the war started. So
that almost ended everything.
They were in a bunker. Wow. And, she was 13 years old.
Wow.
And, so she was kind of not sure about what was, is this it?
Her rapture was very imminent at that
and Chuck
moment.
Was like, honey, isn't this so exciting? And she's like, well, I don't know, Dad. I'm not quite sure if this is exciting or not. But now it was exciting when she looks back on it.
Yeah.
But I remember even not that long ago, a few years ago, we were looking at some footage from Pastor Chuck back in the 70s. And he was speaking at one of the local junior colleges. And it was, just interesting because he's sitting there with a newspaper in one hand, Bible in the other. And he's pretty much talking, telling the story of Israel on the campus. So that was a big passion of his. And you really inherited that, I think, probably a lot of guys in our tribe are still, they think in those terms and they will preach on it. But I think you're probably the one who's more consistently passionate about it, like Chuck was.
To me, when I heard, because when I got saved at 10 years of age through a Billy Graham film, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm saved. And I go to junior high. Most of my friends are not Christian, but I've got my buddies, and we go to camp, and we go to Sunday school, and I've got my friends, live a good life, and believe in Jesus, and when you die, you get to go to heaven. I thought, okay, I'm set. But then when I heard about all this stuff and the Lord coming back and what happened in 1967 and then what God is doing with Israel and bringing the Jews back, and I was like, oh my gosh, I could be living in the generation, that would see Jesus come back to the earth. I can't live a normal, nominal, casual Christian life. It was like, I got to start telling my friends. I started witnessing in high school because God it was a fire in my heart. Like, you can't just, you guys, wake up. The Lord is coming. You can't, you're messing around, and what are you doing? Jesus could come. And so it put a fire in my heart, and it burns even more brightly because as much as what was happening in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even the beginning decade of the 2000s, it's not dissipating. No. God's adding more coals to the fire. We're closer. It's more relevant than ever before.
Yeah. I remember there were certain things that were always sort of talked about as key events, key things currently going on in the world that were indicators that we were on that path, that these things are being fulfilled. And you think of something like, I remember, the big talk, we go back before the European Union existed, it was the European Economic Community. Right. So there was all of this talk about that. And then the European Union came into existence. And so a lot of talk around that. Back in those days, though, there wasn't so much of an Islamic component. Right. It was Islam had not had its revival yet. So they weren't so much in the picture. Russia was more dominant at the time, and Russia was, a lot of things revolving around Russia. And then, things changed geopolitically, but then with the rise of the revival of Islam, all of a sudden people started looking again at some of these biblical texts and go, oh, wow, okay.
So that's what that means.
These different nations here, they actually make up kind of the dominant Islamic world, at least from the Middle Eastern standpoint. So that was a big thing. The idea of we used to talk about globalization. Yes. We used to talk about like a one world system, a one world government. None of us even dreamed about something called the internet. Yeah. We had no thought whatsoever that there would be an internet, that there would be like this technological revolution where everybody would have a phone and everybody would be connected all over the planet because of these things. We knew that there would be ultimately like a one world government, a one world economy, and even a one world religion. But how could that ever really come together? Yeah. And now all of those components are just perfectly in place.
Well, I mean, this little rascal right here, the iPhone, I mean, when it first came out, I remember thinking, why do people text? Why you should actually call and talk to someone. And I couldn't figure out why, my kids, Daniel and Annie, they're always texting. Why do you guys do that? And they go, Dad, if you get on the phone, you got to keep talking to them. If you text, you say it very short and simple, it's done. Yeah. And I went, that's genius. I started texting. But everything else, it was like, now I can put an address in. I always got lost. We had those maps where you had to turn the page, and I would go to a wedding or a funeral, Thomas Guide. Our kids don't know what a Thomas Guide is. No. But now I put in an address, and there's a lady with a British accent, because I chose that, is telling me, turn right here, turn left there you are. I'm just like, it's incredible.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
I know, I do think that. What did we do before GPS? And what did we do even after GPS, but before we had a phone that we could just hit? I just used this yesterday. I just hit the address, and there it was.
I know.
Right there,
Although I do miss giving directions to people because there were always railroad tracks involved in the directions.
I know.
You'll go over the railroad tracks and then the second street will turn right.
Or like when we've been to Ireland, And this is the funniest, just real quick, but we would go to Ireland. Not every street has a name for the road. It's kind of out, and it's in hills and green and beautiful. But we asked this one guy, hey, we need to get to this place. And he goes, all right. He goes, you go down to the yellow pub and you turn left. And you go down until you'll find the white pub, and then you turn right. And then you go to... Anyway, everybody gave directions by pubs. That's how... It wasn't streets. It was by pub you could get from A to B. I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And that's how...
God bless the Irish.
Yeah, that's how Google Maps does it today, too, for Ireland. Just pub to pub to pub.
Pub to pub, yes. Or in our case, here in Southern California, probably Starbucks.
Yeah.
True.
Get
Yeah,
one Starbucks,
coffee
go
places.
up.
Yeah, right.
All right. If you've just joined us, you're listening to Pastor's Perspective. Brian Perez here, along with Pastor Brian Broderson from Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and our guests, Ray and Vicky Bentley from Maranatha Chapel in San Diego. So good to have you guys here.
So how long before our break?
About 4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. So let's just kind of, talk a little bit more about some of these things real quickly. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back. And what I want to do is let's walk through some prophecies. Let's go back and just kind of take a little bit of a journey from the Old Testament.
Okay.
And then we can make our way even to, maybe the book of Revelation. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay. So then back to what we were saying a moment ago. So I'm just thinking back, there was that, there really was that idea about the rapture that many had thought that we had sort of figured out the time frame for the rapture, right?
Yes.
And we calculated it. You did this, I did this, many guys did this. Of course, we kind of took the lead from Chuck and a few others. But, just the idea of the fig tree, when you see the fig tree blossom, know that this generation will not pass. And so, we get the idea, well, what's a generation, Okay, 40 years is a generation. And then the fig tree. What's the fig tree? Well, the fig tree, it's probably Israel. Jeremiah talks about a basket of figs being like Israel, being like figs and so forth. And so then Israel is reborn in 1948. So you tack a generation onto that, which is 40 years. You got 1988 for the second coming, but then the rapture precedes the second coming by 7 years. So we are literally thinking like 81 is the time. And, a lot of people thought that.
Yeah.
And some people came out and actually, put dates and
a guy wrote a book called 88 Reasons Why.
Yeah.
It's happening in 88 or it's culminating or whatever.
Yeah, and then he did
99
or 89 or whatever it was. Yeah. And but it seemed to fit so perfectly.
Yeah.
But then, of course, 81 came and went, and 88 came and went, and here we are in 2020.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, I think the lesson is twofold. Number one, don't set dates. Don't try to get too specific because you'll always be proven wrong. Jesus said it. No one knows the day or the hour, so that means don't try to figure that out. But the other thing, I think, is that we are in the trajectory toward the fulfillment of these things. And
an acceleration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And an acceleration, especially in the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
And an acceleration in ways that I don't think we
could have foreseen.
Yeah, we couldn't foresee them. Yeah, so it's interesting.
And look, I think it's very true that you think about the disciples when you're actually reading the Gospels. There's, we know about 318 to 321 prophecies of the first coming of the Messiah, dropped in various books throughout the Old Testament. What is it really going to look like? And you couldn't really imagine what it would be like until it actually happened. Then when it happened, this is that.
Yeah.
Like Peter was able to say, this is that which was spoken of by the prophet Joel. Yeah. So I think we've had to live in it, to see it, to recognize it in many ways.
Yeah, and like you said, back with the disciples, they didn't even know it when it happened until after it happened.
Yes.
They went,
yes,
that's why he did this.
Yeah,
that's why Jesus said
they
that.
put the scriptures together after the fact.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Got to go to break here, but we will be right back with our guests, Ray and Vicky Bentley from Maranatha Chapel in San Diego. You're listening to Pastor's Perspective. Brian Perez here, along with Brian Broderson of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Hang on.
Pastor's Perspective continues in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Pastor's Perspective continues with your question to 1-888-564-6173. And now here again is your host, Brian Perez.
Here we go with the second half of the Pastor's Perspective program. In the studio today with Pastor Brian Broderson of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and our guests, Ray and Vicki Bentley from Maranatha Chapel in San Diego. The follow-up, the sequel, I should say, to Ray's novel On the Mountain of the Lord has just been released. It is called The Threshing Floor. I can roll my R's with that. That's why I like it.
Nice.
On the Threshing Floor.
I love that,
You're
Brian.
going to pick that up at raybentley.com. So what were we talking about? Prophecy and things.
Yeah, and I wanted to come back and talk a little bit about some specific prophecies that, and Ray, ones that you're most inspired by, most excited about. I'm currently teaching through Isaiah, and we taught Wednesday night. We taught through Isaiah 7 through 12. And 7, you got the great prophecy of the virgin birth. The virgin will conceive and bear a son, call his name Emmanuel. Chapter 9, the great prophecy of the land of Galilee that sat in great darkness, saw a marvelous light. And then, for unto us a child is born, a son is given. And, that beautiful passage that speaks of, the first coming of Christ, but also blended in with the second because of the increase of his government and his kingdom. There will be no end. He'll sit upon the throne of David.
So both comings are...
Yeah, and then in chapter 11, you just have that beautiful description of the root that comes out of the stump of Jesse.
Yes.
And in his days, all of the, righteousness will cover the earth as the seas are covered by water. I love that picture.
That. Beautiful.
Yeah. So that's where we were Wednesday night. So we've been drilling down into Isaiah, who is the prophet of the Messiah. Give me a few prophecies that you are excited about and that you see, like, man, I look around and I see this is happening.
Well, the first one, the biggest one that kind of, literally turned a page for the whole church to have to rethink things. Because we used to, in Bible college, battle with people that were, replacement theology and how can you, but it's kind of understandable that, Israel got destroyed, the temple got torn down, 70 AD, the Jews are scattered to the world. And for 2,000 years, all you got is the church. And Jews, and they get saved, okay, they become Christians, and off we go. But then, Ezekiel had this prophecy in Ezekiel 37, where God takes the prophet to this valley of dry bones, dead bones. They're white. They've been dead for a long time. And he asks, can these bones live? And the prophet says, Lord, you know. And he says, I want you to speak to the bones. I want you to prophesy to the bones and tell them to come together. So he prophesies in the name of the Lord. Bones, so it's dead, come together. Bones come together, then muscles, sinew, flesh, hair, clothing, and this vast sea of human beings is now standing in the valley. And who is this? We don't need to guess in the interpretation of it. It's actually, God says, this is the whole house of Israel. And in that prophecy of Ezekiel 36, 37, 38, 39, there's a prophetic phrase in Hebrew. This will happen in the latter years and the latter days. And that's a Hebrew idiom for the day of the Lord, when it's all going to wrap up. So with the rebirth of Israel in 1948, and yes, in the Old Testament, over and over and over again, one of the symbols of Israel is a fig tree. When Jesus, was going to get rejected, he walked by a fig tree and he cursed it, and that's what he prophesied, the temple will be destroyed. But can a fig tree live again? Can it, bring forth branches and fruit again? He gave that parable. And I believe that when Israel became a nation again, it shocked the world. And we had to start taking God seriously, literally, again. And so, yes, now we're trying to figure out a generation. You had mentioned earlier, there's the short generation of 40 years that wandered in the wilderness. And then there's a longer generation. God told Abraham, your children, descendants will be in Egypt for 4 generations, which 400 years. So somewhere between 40 and 100 years, there's going to be an acceleration. Once Israel is in the land, it's going to start something. And what's interesting, Brian, is that, so it's 2,000 years there was no Israel. Now in 1948, kind of beginning into the third millennium, here is in Israel. Peter said, a day is with the Lord as 1,000 years. 1,000 years is as a day. So in one sense, we can say biblically that Israel ceased to exist or was dead as a nation for 2 days. And at the beginning of the third day, they're resurrected. So what I believe is so powerful about the rebirth of Israel in the whole middle of geopolitics globally and taking up all the airspace of what's happening, around the world and why it's on the front page of the newspaper, this tiny nation of some 7 to 9 million people, is that God has put a focus on them. And 7 billion people, a lot of them don't go to church, a lot of them don't listen to Christian radio and read Christian books. But I believe that Israel's rebirth is God's sermon to 7 billion people. That I predicted, I prophesied, saith the Lord, that I can resurrect a dead nation on the third day. And so Israel becomes a mirror through their resurrection as a nation, because it's never happened to any other people on the planet in history who've lost their homeland for 2,000 years, come back to where they originally started, and been predicted that it would happen, except Israel. So what does that remind us of? Israel is kind of a mirror or a living sermon that people deal with on the front page of the newspaper, that God says, I can also raise my son from the dead, and I did raise my son from the dead on the third day. So that's very powerful, and that's kind of got the wheels turning all around the world. The second prophecy that really lights us up is Jesus said, Jerusalem will be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Well, that brings us into the current times of 2020. Obviously, we talked about earlier that in 1967, because when Israel became a nation in 1948, they didn't have East Jerusalem. And you know how the world today wants to kind of cut Jerusalem in half and let's give half to the Palestinians and half to the Jews. The problem with that is that half of Jerusalem has 100% of the holy sites. That's the eastern half. That's what they want to give away, maybe to the Palestinians, and the western half to the Jewish people. Well, the problem with the western half of Jerusalem is there are 0 holy sites in West Jerusalem. It's just suburbs, that have grown out of the original Jerusalem. So it's all in East Jerusalem. So in 1967, that 6-day war, bigger than anything else that happened, was they recaptured East Jerusalem. And they decided to let everybody have their own holy site. But It's been the status quo until this day. What happened just recently with our president, Trump, and I'm going to keep this narrow politically, let's leave everything over to the side for a second, but when President Trump on December the 6th, 2017, said we're going to move our embassy from Tel Aviv and we're going to move our embassy, the United States Embassy. That's like putting a thumb on the scale. The biggest, most powerful nation, military, economy in the world is putting its embassy in East Jerusalem, which is where the Temple Mount is, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, and all of that. That's huge. And so that's where we are. So we see that this shift is beginning to happen with Jerusalem being the center of Israel, recognized as the capital of Israel. And then here we are in 2020. And in the very first month of January, on the 28th, the president says, now that we've recognized Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel, I've got a peace plan that he calls the peace plan of the century. And this has lit up the world again. He's going to roll it out over the next 4 years, but this is huge, what is happening. So that brings everything we've known, lived, grown up with for decades now into a whole new focus.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop. It just keeps rolling on. And I think, if you study the history of Israel and if you study the history of the Jewish people from going back to 70 A.D. and they're removed from the land sovereignly by God through the Romans, and never to return again in any way with any kind of a substantial, independent, self-governed kind of a position. A couple of attempts early on, 135, the Bar Kokhba revolt. They thought Bar Kokhba was the son of the star. This is really the Messiah. Yeah. He's going to deliver us from Rome. Yeah. Bar Kokhba was knocked out, and pretty much after 135, that was it. There wasn't even, you couldn't even call it an attempt to reestablish themselves in the land until the late 1800s. They start talking about doing this. Theodor Herzl, a Jewish man from Budapest, Hungary, he gets this vision for a homeland for the Jewish people. So they start thinking in terms of coming back into the ancient land, right? Yeah. And then there's talk about, governments are talking about, but maybe a different piece of land, but you can't go back to that one. Yeah. But then when I don't know if you know, but one of the places that Theodor Herzl was thinking of is Uganda. Yes, I know.
You knew that.
Interesting, yeah.
So and then
Uganda, of all places.
And then Theodor Herzl, a Jewish guy who was not religious, has a Christian friend, a pastor, who goes, you guys can't go back to Uganda or Africa. You got to go back to Israel. And Theodor Herzl was like, hey, I think we could raise more money that way by, going back to our ancient. So then he goes back to Israel. It's hilarious.
But to me, then when you get to the First World War, and you get to the end of the World War, the 1917, 1918, there, and then you've got this thing called the Balfour Declaration, that takes place. So the British government promises that they're going to give the Jews this land, through this declaration by this man Balfour. And then, they sort of renege and they go back and forth. And then, you finally come to the whole Battle of Independence. The Independence battle was really, a lot of people don't know, it was a battle with Britain. It was a battle with Britain actually ruled the land at the time. And they got their independence from the British Empire. And but when you look at that whole story, when you read it, when you understand the details of it, to me, it is nothing less than miraculous. You can't really explain it. No. And even the fact that the small group of people won that war, it doesn't even make any sense that they won the war, because they didn't even have like a David and Goliath moment. It wasn't like some great hero rose up and delivered them. It was like at the end, it's like, they won? How did that happen? How did that even happen? Yeah. So you see the providence of God. To me, you just look at this and you think, okay, like some have said, that the Jewish people themselves are one of the greatest testimonies against atheism.
Yes.
They are.
Yes, because they prove that the Bible, in fact, Bible prophecy itself separates the Bible from every other religious holy book in the world, because God has predicted so many things in the future and they come to pass.
Yeah.
What can you do with that? There is a God.
Yeah.
He knows the future.
Yeah.
It's all going according to his plan.
Yeah. And so where I was going with that, though, is so you get to 1948, the date that you mentioned, and then you get to, so Israel becomes a nation, an independent nation again. Then you get to 67 and you have the 6-Day War, and then you have the, Jerusalem is taken at that point. And then a succession of battles and fights and wars, since then to this very day. But to me, that 1948 date was like it was the trigger.
Yes.
It was kind of
a flash of fire and lightning from heaven.
Yeah, it's almost like the beginning of the end.
Yes.
Absolutely. So we're still in that.
Yes, we're in that trajectory.
Yeah, toward that ultimate end, which is the return of the Messiah,
right?
Jesus, to reign over the house of Jacob forever, like God said he would in the first place.
Right.
So it's amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah, it's astounding.
And what is also amazing, and a lot of people probably are not aware that are listening right now, is that back in 2016, there, somehow as this president, very controversial, Trump gets elected. I think a lot of people are not aware that there is a reconvened modern Sanhedrin. We read about in the Bible, the Sanhedrin, they were kind of made up of, religiously the left and the right, Sadducees, and then the Pharisees, and they kind of made the decisions. Well, it's only been a few years ago that modern Israel has reconvened a modern Sanhedrin. Mm-hmm. And the Sanhedrin in 2016 sent 2 letters, one to President Trump in Washington, D.C., and another letter to Vladimir Putin in Russia, and said, we believe that you are 2 Cyruses, and that you are to recognize Jerusalem, and that you are then to help us and give us permission and help to rebuild the temple. And there's actually a coin that is called the Cyrus coin. And on that Cyrus coin, people can Google it, they can look it up. On the Cyrus coin, on one side is a picture of ancient Cyrus, who's prophesied in Isaiah, chapter 44 and 45. God took a pagan king, idol-worshiping king, Persia, who defeated Babylon, and he said, you're my shepherd, and I'm going to use you. I've chosen you, and you're going to help rebuild my city, Jerusalem, and you're going to help lay the foundations to my temple. And that was written 150 years before Cyrus was born. And Josephus, the Jewish historian, says that Jews 150 years after Isaiah made that prophecy came up to Cyrus and said, hey, you're named by our prophet Isaiah in the Bible by name. It says Cyrus. Isaiah 45 verse 1. You're supposed to help us go back after we lost everything with Babylon. You conquered them. Help us rebuild Jerusalem and help us lay the foundations for the temple. And Cyrus said, I'm going to do it. He sent them back, he gave them permission, and then he gave them money to help rebuild the temple. So think about that. Now there's a Cyrus coin, and on the Cyrus coin is a picture of Cyrus in the background, and in the foreground right next to it is a picture of President Trump.
Yeah.
And on the back side of the coin is a picture of the temple. And they have said, look, you have moved the embassy, you're the most powerful nation, you've moved the embassy and recognized Jerusalem as a capital. You're helping us establish and build Jerusalem, recognizing it as our capital. Now you need to flip the coin over and do part 2. But before he can do that, he's got to bring peace. So here's this peace deal that's out there. So look, it's evolving, it's unfolding, but everybody that knows anything about the Bible, there's a peace deal at the very end where they try to divide up the land and make peace, and it goes well for the first half, and then it goes very, very bad the second half. And here we are looking at these things. Very bad. Very bad. But anyway, the Cyrus coin. So this is not Christians, interpreting or, saying we think this or that. This is Orthodox Jews today in Israel saying we believe as Jews, according to the Bible and scriptures, that your president is a Cyrus, And they kind of believe the same about Putin, that he's a kind of a Cyrus, and that you guys need to help us make a deal so that we can build our temple. And that's what's going on right now. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Now, one of the most interesting things that is currently happening, and I think very much unexpected, is the softening of Arab leaders toward Israel.
Yes.
And I just read today, and I wish I could remember where the guy was from. He was an ambassador or something of some Arab nation, and he was just basically saying that, you know, the Jews are not our enemies. They're not. You know, we need to get over this anti-Israel thing. This is a guy's like an Arab guy saying this. I was with a friend from the Sudan a couple of days ago, and I just randomly, we were talking. He's from southern Sudan, but he was originally born in the north in Khartoum, and was a Muslim, and, you know, came to faith. And I just randomly said, like, so what's happening in the north of Sudan today? And he goes, oh, you'll never believe it. It's amazing. It's like a revolution has taken place. I'm like, what are you talking about? Tell me about it. He said, yeah, it's like a young generation. They just rose up and they just said, we're tired of this. We don't want to, and this is what he said, we don't want to hate Israel. We don't want to be against the Jews. We don't want to follow this ancient, Islamic government that we have. So they've ousted that former president.
Yes.
And the northern Sudan is
transformation,
having a total
radical. Yes. And you know what? That is so powerful. That's happening all throughout the Sunni world.
Yeah.
And, you know, real simply, I can say this. I think that's going to continue to unfold because you have a division in Islam between the Sunnis, the head of which is Saudi Arabia, and Shia, which is in Iran. Yeah. So the Shiites are kind of like no compromise, no Israel, no Jews ever. Yeah. But the Sunnis are like, you know what? We could live with the Jews. We should compromise with the Jews. Yeah. And part of the reason for that is that I think that Shia wants to unite Islam under their theology. Yeah. So they've sent drones to blow up oil fields in Saudi Arabia. So kind of the target in many ways of Iran's Shia Islam is Saudi Arabia. Why? They want to unite Islam under their theology. Yeah. Then once they conquer Saudi Arabia and Mecca and Medina, then they go after the little Satan Israel and the big Satan, which is America. Yeah. So Saudi Arabia feels that nuclear gun, so to speak, to their head, and they're going, you know what? We need a neighbor who has nuclear power that could help protect us from this threat. Yeah. And so I think we're seeing them move. Yeah. You know, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. So so you spend a fair amount of time in Israel.
Yes.
You and I have been there together, and I love it. You love it.
Yeah.
But you've also they're connected with people on the level of, you know, the government to some degree, and just, you know, God's given you some very interesting relationships. So talk a little bit about just through some of those things without getting too specific. Right. Obviously, you don't want to do that. But, you know, when you're there on your own, meeting with people, having conversations, what are you sensing?
Yeah. Well, let's say on the Jewish side and the Messianic side, one of the ministers over there that we both know said, Ray, you cannot believe what is happening among the Orthodox Jewish people. They're coming in to me and saying for the first time, he goes, this hasn't happened in decades, from the time that we began. You know, my dad started the church. Right. And now this business guy has taken it over, and he goes, they're coming in and saying, we're either having dreams or we're thinking about, and we're recognizing, hey, Jesus is from here. He's actually Jewish. What is the New Testament? We live around Galilee or whatever, Jerusalem. He did stuff, and they're coming in. He goes, I've never seen anything like it.
Amazing, yeah.
And on the other side, on the Palestinian side, Arab side, they are also saying that we are seeing many Muslim people who are having dreams or having visions that goes all the way into Syria, into Jordan, and they go, we've never seen anything like it in 2,000 years. It's almost like God is going and dropping, by air, visions and dreams, and they're coming to the church saying, I had a dream of Jesus. What does it mean? Yeah. So there's a spiritual revolution that is happening even among the believers, Messianic, Jewish believers, Arab, Palestinian believers, that is unprecedented. It's never been like this before.
That is amazing stuff. Yeah.
It is.
And I've heard some of those same stories, and it's fascinating. Now, what about on the level of, so we're talking about religious Jews there and even Messianic Jews. What about the more secular folks? You know, the people in the government are generally secular. I mean, there's a religious aspect to it, obviously. But so the Benjamin Netanyahus of the country, what do you sense with these guys?
Well, I'll say this, that, Benjamin Netanyahu said that we have been figuring out as Jews in Israel, we have many enemies in the world. Mm-hmm. He goes, but there are and there's only 7 million of us in Israel. Mm-hmm. He goes, but there's 2.6 billion Christians in the world. Mm-hmm. And we found out there's a lot of them that like us, who love us, who bless us. Why shouldn't we be friends? So there's been a shift from a governmental level to allow Christians to walk with Jewish people, not be afraid or ashamed. Hey, look, we believe in Jesus. We're not going to proselytize or beat you up to convert you or the things the church has done for the past. But we can be open and honest and have a relationship. Yeah, look, we believe Jesus is the guy. He's Jewish. You don't, but that's who we are. But we want to love you, bless you. We want to help work together. Yeah. And there's an openness from a governmental level all the way down to business people that say, you know what, Christians are not always our enemies. They love us, they pray for us, they bless us, and that's opening whole new doors and corridors of opportunity to share what we believe about, Jesus.
Yeah. And you've been of the mindset that you're going to just love them and bless them, and even if they don't respond right now, that you're planting a seed that somewhere down the road, and maybe when there's a lot of trouble, because we know ultimately there's going to be big trouble back in Israel, in Jerusalem, that maybe then it's that seed is planted and that thought comes back and like, those people loved us.
Yes. Yeah, truth planted with love is powerful. Yeah. It bears fruit.
Amen. Amen. All right, well, we should tell them about your book one last time because, Brian, you're going to do it as quick as you've ever done anything.
Because the music is upon us. 30 seconds. Yes, Ray Bentley has a new book. It's called The Threshing Floor. It's the follow-up to his other novel, On the Mountain of the Lord. Do you have to read book one in order to understand book two?
You don't have to read book one to understand book two.
But you should.
You would enjoy it more, and it sets up the characters. But
Awesome. RayBentley.com is the website. Ray and Vicky from Maranatha Chapel in San Diego. If you live down in that area and you're looking for a church home, check it out this Sunday. Thanks so much for listening to Pastor's Perspective today. Brian Perez here. Good night.
Thanks for listening to Pastor's Perspective. We trust you've been blessed and had your question answered. Join us Monday through Friday and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. The preceding was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, California.